I just want to say hello to everybody that's here now. My name is Alyssa Harlow, and I am the Director of Marketing here at MD2B Connect. Thank you for joining us for our webinar series, Residency Real Talk with Dr. Samir Desai. Tonight, we're going to be answering your questions from the Google form. And if there's any time at the end, we will try and answer your questions from the chat. However, if there's any questions that you have that we can't get to tonight, please feel free to reach out to our team, especially Dr. Desai. We're always happy to help you. Your success is important to us, and we want to make sure that we can help you in this process in any way that we can. So please don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us on our team. We're always happy to talk to you about anything, whatever it may be. So with that said, I'll be sharing various links in the chat regarding various resources for you to use, including blog posts, YouTube videos, anything that's related to what we'll be talking to tonight that may be useful to you. So please check the chat for that. And if you guys have any questions, please share them there as well for if we have time at the end. And so with that said, I will go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Desai for introduction.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Alyssa. A very warm welcome to all of you here in the early part of November. Can you believe that it's November? My goodness, time is passing by fast. So I hope you are all well. We like to do these webinars every month, and the topic that we choose has to do with the time of the year that we're in. So many of our rotators are concerned about interviewing. This is interview season. And so we wanted to devote this episode to the residency interview. So we're going to be talking about various issues and concerns related to the residency interview, give you a lot of tips and strategies to help you elevate your interview performance. And one of the things that Alyssa and I wanted to get across to you is that at MD2B Connect, our program is about not just a rotation, it's about providing mentorship and guidance. It's helping you develop personally and professionally. And we do that in different ways. The webinar is one way to do it. We obviously try to get to know you very well so we can give you very specific advice that is tailored to your situation. And so we can't always do that in a webinar, but you all have an opportunity to reach out to us directly. As Alyssa said, you are always welcome to reach out to me when you're concerned, when you're worried, when you're not sure about what to do. You just want somebody who's a good listener to kind of talk about things. I'm there for you. We can always talk about your situations. Don't hesitate to reach out. I'm never going to be too busy to take your call or answer your text. I may not do it right away. I'm in the hospital or I'm tied up, but I will get back to you. So please do reach out, even if it's just to say hi, to let me know how you're doing. I always love to hear from you. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen because you all have submitted a number of questions, some very good questions, and I want to go through them one at a time. There may be a few questions that I share with you that are very specific to a particular individual and may not pertain to the larger group. And so when we encounter those questions, I will encourage the questioner who submitted that question to just reach out to me directly, because I do want to answer those questions, but I want to devote as much time as I can to the questions that are as broad-based as possible and will fulfill the needs of our widest audience that is with us tonight. So again, if you are a questioner who sent me something very specific that I'm not able to cover tonight, please, please, please reach out to me so that I can help you with that issue. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Sure. And I did just want to mention too that if you're just starting your rotation with us, you will be in touch with Dr. Desai and have his number at some point. That way you can contact him directly for any questions you may have, just so that you guys are aware. So if you have any questions, please feel free. Like I said, you can send your questions to info@md2bconnect.com, and we'll be happy to help you in any way we can as well.
Yes, thank you for reminding me, Alyssa. I know that I've spoken or communicated with most of you, but we do have some new rotators, and would want to welcome you to our program. If I haven't reached out to you yet, we will be in touch soon, and I really look forward to talking with you and getting to know you, so you can expect that that will happen in the near future. So let's get into this. I always like to start these by talking about where we're at and what should we be doing, or what can we be doing. So here in November, many of you have applied. If you remember, September 25th was the first day that programs could download your applications. So we are now about 6 weeks into the cycle as far as post-application submission. And what I want to remind you is that we have opportunities to increase our interview number. So wherever you are at right now is not the final number. So October is a big month for interview invitations, but so is November. October and November are our two leading months for receiving interviews, but it doesn't end there. People get interviews in December, in January, and even, believe it or not, in February. So what that means is that there's still a lot of time to get interviews. So wherever you're at, sitting at however many interviews you currently have, this is not what you will end up with. There's a chance to get more interviews. I have seen people get interviews, as I said, in December, January, and match with those interviews. I have seen people get interviews in February and match with those programs. So keep that in mind. I know that there's a lot of stress and anxiety out there right now because of where we are in the season. What this also means is that as we're waiting to hear from programs, we want to take an active role in the process. There is quite a bit that we can do to help our application get noticed. And so one of the things that we can do is we can send out letters of interest. Now, there's a lot of debate about this. I hear a lot of people not sure of whether to do this or not. In the old days, I'm talking about 3-4 years ago, there wasn't as much debate about this. It was more of an accepted practice among the residency applicants to send these letters of interest. But now there's been some hesitation that people have expressed because they have heard some messages that are coming from programs where programs have either clearly indicated or may have hinted at, we don't want to receive these communications. And while that is true, that is not necessarily true at all programs. I would say that a smaller percentage of programs have some strong beliefs. Now, the best that we can do as an applicant is go to the program websites and review any other channels of information, whether that is Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, whatever means that a program is communicating with, and to see if there is any information there about their policies regarding pre-interview communication. Sometimes after you apply, these programs will send you emails indicating what their policies are. Now, if these policies are clearly stated and they tell us that they don't want a letter of interest, then we have to respect that. But many programs don't have those policy statements, and they haven't made it clear that they feel the same way. And they may be very receptive to a well-written letter of interest. So I would not look at all of these programs and consider them as all programs operate the same way. But before you do send that email or letter of interest out, you do want to check to make sure that you're not violating any rule or policy that they have. Now, we should draw a distinction between a letter of interest, which is a communication that you send to a program that is expressing a very, very specific desire for you to come to that program in the hopes of getting an interview. You know, that's essentially what a letter of interest is doing. It's communicating your interest to that program so that they appreciate your interest and can consider you appropriately for a position as an interviewee. But we have to distinguish the letter of interest from an update. So programs that come out and say, we don't want a letter of interest, may be receptive to an update. Now, what's the difference between a letter of interest and an update? An update is when you have something new to share, right? Something that's happened after you've submitted your application. For example, you might have submitted your application in September 24th, and then you did a rotation in October. And maybe you didn't put that rotation in your application because you were limited in your ability to do that because it was happening in October. Well, that can be considered a form of an update, something very relevant that you've done that could be very well received, right, by a program and could be factored into their decision making. Perhaps you have a new letter of recommendation. Maybe you did a rotation in September and you knew that you weren't going to get that letter on time, but now it's available in October or November. Well, you've added it to the system, you've sent it to the program, and that's an update. You have an opportunity now to update the program with that new letter. Let's say you went to a conference in the month of October, or let's say that here in a week you're going to be presenting at a conference your abstract or your poster. Well, that's a new development in your candidacy, and that's a reason to send a program an update. So when you look through the language that a program has put out there saying, we don't want a letter of interest, look carefully to see if they don't want a letter of interest, but they're willing to accept an update. And by all means, update those programs. And certainly programs that don't have any policies against pre-interview communication, you can send updates, and the updates can be combined as a letter of interest. Now, some of you may have sent letters of interest, and you may be waiting on a response. Well, if enough time has passed, it may be worthwhile considering whether to send another communication. So again, if you have an update, that may be the impetus for sending a second communication. So sometimes we do send multiple communications to a single program. We try not to overdo it. We don't want to be, quote unquote, a pest to the program, but sometimes there are reasons why we might need to communicate on more than one occasion. There are times where a letter of interest may arrive early for that particular program, and maybe a letter sent a little bit later may have a little bit more bandwidth to consider it. They're at a different point in time, and it may be received in a different way in November versus October. So there can be reasons to send multiple communications. So sending out letters of interest is something that I highly recommend. Every year when it's done, and it's done well, I do see a lot of results from it, and I hope that you will too. So that is letters of interest updates. We'll talk more about that because we have some questions that were submitted directly asking about that. What else do you want to do right now? What can you be working on? You can continue to build your CV. There are things that you may have been doing that you can continue your work on. Again, there may be research projects that you're following through on. There may be new rotations. Believe it or not, rotations done in the fall and the winter can help you match. Even though they're not in your application, many programs, when you go for interviews, they are very curious to know, what are you currently doing, or what will you be doing from now until the match in March? And if there are some concrete steps that you're taking that are bolstering your profile, that's a great thing to talk about. And so you can be somewhat strategic in these months to enhance your CV and then use that information in different ways to strengthen your chances, even in this current cycle. So building your CV can be very helpful even after you turn in your application in September. Now, since we are here in November, we are focused on getting ourselves ready for the residency interview. We all know how important the interview is. If you look at the many, many surveys that have been done of program directors, you will see that interview is at the top of the list when it comes to factors that programs use to create their rank order list. So the interview is vital. There's a large gulf between the importance of the interview and the importance of everything else for the purposes of ranking. My experience has been that people tend not to prepare as extensively for interviews as they can or they should. But it should not be taken lightly. Interviewing well is an exercise, an effort that takes a lot of time. I think back to when I was an interviewee for residency, and when I first started my prep, I really didn't know how to interview because I hadn't done much of it. And it took me a lot of time and effort to get better with practice every single day, and a lot of it, hours upon hours. And that is what's required. You've got to put in the time, and you've got to use the right resources. You've got to really think about yourself and who you are and what you've done. And you've got to mine your background for the content that you all have that makes you unique and special, and be able to bring it out and speak about it in a compelling way. All of that takes a lot of time and effort. So we'll be talking about some of those things here today. So among the questions that we received a number of questions on the behavioral interview. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when you look at the questions that are typically asked in a residency interview, you're going to see some that come up time and time again. You're going to see, tell me about yourself. You're going to see, what are your strengths? Why are you interested in our program? But there's another type of question that are known as behavioral interview questions. These have become more popular among residency interviewers. These are questions that specifically call upon you as an interviewee to share an example, a story from your life. And let me describe how a behavioral interview question sounds so that you will always recognize when you're dealing with one. Typically, it sounds something like this. Tell me about a time when you were in a conflict situation and how you handled it. So you notice that the way the question is phrased, it's asking you for a specific example. It'd say, describe a situation in which you were on the receiving end of criticism that you felt was unfair. and how you handled it. So again, a question that's asking you to come up with a very specific example. Now, the hard part of these questions is that if you don't incorporate these types of questions into your prep, if you're asked these questions in a real interview, it's extremely difficult to come up with an example on the spot. Very, very hard. And so what happens is that the interviewee speaks in very general terms. So if they're asked about, tell me about a time when you were in a conflict situation and how you handled it, they talk in general about conflict. And that type of answer, while useful, isn't answering the question in the way the interviewer intended it to be answered. And therefore, you don't get the highest points for that type of answer. So to improve your odds of giving a meaningful answer, you must incorporate behavioral interview questions into your prep. So what I encourage everyone to do is to get a list of behavioral interview questions. And we have lists of behavioral interview questions in various channels at MD2B Connect. First, you can get a long list in our book, The Successful Match. And there's some guidance in that book on how to answer these questions effectively. We have blog posts on the behavioral interview at our sister website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, where we go into depth, not only give you a list of these questions, but again, give you some approaches to handling this. So first step is get a list of questions, a lot of them. The second step is to categorize these questions into groups. So the most common groups are behavioral interview questions related to conflict, to teamwork, to leadership, to criticism, to mistakes. So put these questions that you encounter into groups. And then as you put them into groups, look at them and try to see how they're related to each other. Because there's a lot of behavioral interview questions out there, but many of them are variations of the same question. So what you're going to do once you have a nice list of questions is you're going to take an inventory of your background, and you're going to look for stories and examples that you can use to form the basis of your answer to these questions. And in some cases, the questions are going to be so similar, you're going to be able to use the same story to answer those questions, because it's highly unlikely that you're going to get several similar questions. Okay, so if you have a list of 100 behavioral interview questions, you don't need 100 different stories, because a lot of them are variations of a base question. Now, once you have the questions in hand and you have developed your stories, now it's time to create a framework where you can embed your story in the answer. Now, the approach that we recommend in the Successful Match book and in our blog posts is using the STAR technique. And the STAR technique, the S in STAR stands for the situation. So first you describe the situation you were in. The T in STAR has to do with what we call the task that you faced, or the challenge that you encountered in that situation. The A in STAR is the action you took. The R in STAR are the results of your actions. And we like to add one more thing, and we make it STAR L, and the L stands for lessons. So you want to conclude your answer with some content on what the lessons you took from this. Now, before we build out an answer, we should talk for a minute about why these questions are asked. So there is evidence in research, in job performance, both in medicine and outside of medicine, that suggests that behavioral interview questions are more predictive. The answers that you give are more predictive of your performance. And so that's why these types of questions are finding their way into the residency interview. Now, one thing that you can take home with you is that it's rare for an entire interview to be behavioral, but it's common for 1 or 2 out of 10 questions to be behavioral. That's why it's well worth the effort to prepare for these. Now, going back to our framework, so I'm going to give you an example, and then we'll construct something, okay, to show you how to do this. So let's say that the question is, describe a time when you had to work with a difficult coworker and how you managed the situation. So now you have to go through your history and think about all these people that you've worked with and come up with a time where you had somebody who you didn't see eye to eye with and you had some difficulty working with them. So I'm going to present a scenario. So our hypothetical scenario here is going to be that we are a researcher and we're working in a lab. And in that lab, we're working with a fellow researcher. So this is the 2 of us. And we've been asked to work together on an important project for our PI. And we started on it together and we were getting along very, very well. And then a month or 2 into the project, something has changed with our fellow researcher. Now, our fellow researcher, who was originally very excited and enthusiastic and reliable, is not coming to the lab on time, and sometimes not coming at all. And when he arrives and is there, his attitude and personality is different. The excitement, enthusiasm that he had at the beginning isn't there anymore, and he's a bit abrupt and even abrasive in your interactions. And so clearly something has changed. And the problem that you're facing is now, because he's not coming as often, you're doing more of the work and you're getting a bit behind. And you're starting to get worried about, am I going to meet the deadline? Because you have the pressure from your PI, right, to get the work done. So this is the situation. So let's say you look back through your background and you find this story. Well, you're going to first describe the situation. Okay, this is your situation. Okay, so how are you going to start your answer? You're going to start your answer first by saying, I've been fortunate to work with so many different coworkers in a range of experiences, not only my hospital and clinical work, but also a lot of my extracurricular activities when I've been a part of different organizations. And one of the things that I've enjoyed is working with so many different types of coworkers. But on occasion, there's been a time where I've experienced difficulty. And on one such occasion, I remember I was in the lab working on a research project under the supervision of my PI. And it wasn't just me, it was another coworker who was at my same level as me. And so the 2 of us were student researchers working on this project. And when we started together, we both were very excited and enthusiastic, and we were getting a lot of work done. And things were going along famously, but about 1 to 2 months into the project, something changed. My coworker began showing up late. Sometimes he didn't show up at all. And when he was there, the enthusiasm and excitement that he originally had was replaced by a bit of a rude attitude, and at times he was abrasive. And so I was taken aback by this, but this caused me quite a bit of difficulty because I had to step in and do additional work while balancing my other responsibilities outside of my lab. And despite working longer hours, the work was too difficult for just one person to do. And so we were getting behind, and I was beginning to be afraid that we would not meet the deadline that our PI expected us to finish everything by. So now, that is the situation. So I've just described the situation. It's very vivid, it's very clear what the situation is. Now I'm going to move on to the task, and I'm going to try to explain what I have to do and what the challenge is that I'm facing. Okay, so now I'm going to say that because of this situation, I was put in a very difficult and delicate position because I have a responsibility to fulfill my obligations to my PI and to complete this research. At the same time, I know that I'm not going to be able to do it on my own, and I have to find a way to collaborate with my partner. And with my partner and his behavior changing, I have to figure out a way to manage that so that we can continue to work effectively to reach our goals. So I have to try to find a way to keep the work going and keep this relationship working well. So now I'm presenting the challenge, the task ahead of me. Now I'm going to explain what actions I took. So to handle the situation, what I did was when my coworker showed up, I went to him and I said, John, at the end of our session today, can we just talk for a few minutes? I think this would be a good time just for us to review where things are and assess our progress because, as you know, our deadline is coming. And so when John was ready at the end of the session, I would make sure we would go somewhere confidential and private so I could have this very delicate conversation. And I would start by saying, John, I've really enjoyed working with you over the last couple months. I think we've made a lot of progress. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was how you think the project is going. And the reason I'm going to present it that way to him is because I don't want to accuse him of anything. I want him to have a chance in a gentle way to explain to me what might be going on because his behavior may have changed because there's a major issue in his life. It could be that his grades are not going so well. Maybe he's struggling with his health. Maybe he's worried about something in his family, but I want to be empathetic and also give him a chance to explain. And so if he was to tell me that there's a problem going on in his life, then I would try to be a good friend and colleague and try to support him through that and see what I can do to help him with that so that he can also continue to be productive in the lab. And if he told me that there was nothing wrong, then I would have to be a bit more direct because I would need to know how to handle the situation. And so I would say something to the effect of, John, I remember that when we first started this project, you were very excited and enthusiastic about it, as was I. But I have noticed that something has changed recently. It seems like when you're in the lab, your enthusiasm and excitement isn't what it used to be. And again, I would hope that he might be able to fill me in on what's going on. And so if he did, again, I would support him. But if he didn't, I have to, again, be more direct. And ultimately, if he wasn't willing to share what was going on and he wasn't able to fulfill his obligations, then I would have to take it to a higher level. So I would have to inform him that I cannot keep up with all the work as one person, but if he was feeling pressed for time or unable to fulfill his commitments, that we could go together to our PI and we could talk about it. And maybe there was some extra assistance, or maybe there were some things that we could get done. And so I would then bring it up to him in that manner. And at that point, he might be willing to change his behavior because he may not want to get the PI involved. But again, ultimately, if I have to do everything and he's not willing to do it, then I would have to get my PI involved. So these are all the actions that I could potentially take. But if you notice, the actions that I'm proposing, I'm trying to solve this problem in a delicate way to preserve our working relationship with this applicant, or not applicant, but with this coworker, before I have to take it to the extreme action of going to my PI. And then after I go through the actions, I'm going to go into the result. So the result is going to be whatever happened, hopefully was a positive development that you were able to get to, which resolved the situation, because then the interviewer is going to get the sense that whatever you've shared, that's how you're going to handle it in the future. So the idea is to take an example from your life that's a positive example and to put it together in the STAR technique so you get this across. Now, if you notice, a lot of what I said is very, very long. And the reason it's very, very long is when you're first creating your answer, you never worry about time. You create the best answer you can, even if it's 4 or 5 minutes long. Once you have it perfected in your mind, then you make cuts to it to bring it down to around 2 minutes. Okay. So this is the framework. Now, the last part of the framework is the lessons learned. And that's where you end by telling the interviewer what you took away from the experience. Okay. So you might say something very succinctly like, the lessons that I took away from this is that when things change in your working relationship, that you have to handle things delicately and try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Although there's a lot that is affecting you, if you try to look at it in a global way where you're considering not only your perspective but their perspective, then you're more likely to see the different angles of the situation. And then once you find out more about it, you'll be able to find some common agreement. So you leave them with a lesson at the end. So again, the STAR technique: situation, task, action, result, lessons. When you're creating your answer, don't worry about time at the beginning, even if it's 4 or 5 minutes long. Once you've got it refined and where you need it, then you start making cuts. The idea is to get it to around 2 minutes or so. Okay. Now, what are other questions? So somebody asked us, please break down residency interviews to me like we're 5 years old. Now, I don't know exactly what this means, but let me give you some general tips on how to be a strong interviewee. So first of all, in order to be a strong interviewee, you have to know yourself. You have to know what it is that you have to get across in every interview. And then you have to know how to get that across through the different questions that you're asked. The things that you get across may vary a bit from program to program, depending upon what specialty you're applying for. Sometimes people are applying to multiple specialties. And also depending upon what the program is looking for. You may be strong in teaching and research, but maybe that program doesn't have a lot of research, in which case more of your answers may need to cover teaching to show fit. Okay. You also need to know the qualities and skills that are valued by your specialty and that program, because you have to find a way to communicate those qualities and skills, again, through your answers. Since fit is so important to programs, you have to think about how to show that fit, as I was mentioning. right? And there's different places in the interview where you can demonstrate that fit. Finally, you have to think about what concerns a program may have and be ready to talk about them, and sometimes take the initiative to talk about them even if you're not asked about it. So for example, if you're worried about your YOG, if you're worried about your low step score, if you're worried about a course in your medical school that you had to remediate, you have to be ready to talk about those things. Okay? So those are some key tips that you want to remember. Now, when you're creating your answers, you try to have something very original. You want something to be very specific about you, because you're all very unique. A lot of times we can create answers that don't make us sound as special as we are. But that's where knowing yourself will help you create very special answers that only you could give. And that's what you're trying to do. Now, what are common things that an ING can be expect to be asked in a residency interview? So the common questions are things like, tell me about yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Why are you interested in our program? Why are you interested in this specialty? Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Why should we choose you? Tell me about your research. These are the common questions. Now, there's a lot of ways to ask these same questions that we all need to understand are variations of these questions. Because if we don't look at questions that way, when we get asked the variation, it feels like we haven't prepared for them. So we must think about the variations of these questions, because interviewers can ask them in different ways. We also need to know our application inside and out, because they're going to ask us about it. They're going to ask us about our research on earthworms. They're going to ask us about our leadership. They're going to ask us about the health fair that we took in. Anything in your application is fair game for them to ask us. So we need to know our application. Anything in your personal statement, they could take one line out of your personal statement and ask you to elaborate on it. So you need to analyze your personal statement and be ready to talk about any line that you put in there. Right? So those things are common. Seasoned interviewers will not always ask the standard questions. They'll ask questions based on the things that you say. So if they say, tell me about yourself, and you give them an answer, then they're going to ask something about something you revealed in your answer. So you have to be ready to talk about those different aspects of yourself. Next question. I applied to both family medicine and internal medicine. I did several interviews in family medicine, but how do I prepare for the internal medicine interview? What's the difference between FM and IM interview prep? Much of it's the same, but you have to think about the differences between the two specialties. One thing you have to remember is not to get things mixed up. And sometimes applicants actually forget where they are and what they're interviewing in, and by accident you might mention the wrong specialty name. So you have to safeguard yourself from doing that. But you have to develop unique answers to the questions, why this specialty, right? Why are you interested in family medicine versus why are you interested in internal medicine are going to be different, right? They're not the same specialty, right? Family medicine, there's more of an emphasis on women's health, in pediatrics, right? Those are things that are not standard parts of internal medicine. So there are significant differences between the specialties, and you have to be ready to talk about that. And you have to know what those differences are, because if you're not aware, you may inadvertently say something that makes you sound like you're better suited for the other specialty. Now, you also have to think about what family medicine programs versus internal medicine programs are looking for, right? Family medicine programs tend to be very, very holistic, right? You see that word on a lot of family medicine program websites. That's not to say you don't see it on some internal medicine websites, but family medicine Holistic is a hallmark. Community focused is a hallmark. There's a lot of work that family medicine physicians do in the community. Family medicine programs usually have a community medicine rotation. We said that they have women's health, right? We said they have pediatrics. So you have to draw the differences between these specialties and adjust your answers accordingly. But the structure of these interviews tend to be the same, whether you're doing family medicine or internal medicine. It's the content of your answers that'll change. What would be a good answer for what made you decide to leave your country? So that really depends on what it is that made you come here to the US. Now, I've met applicants from all over the world with different stories. I've met applicants who left their home because of violence. I have met applicants who have left their home because they can't practice a particular specialty because there's not an opportunity there in their country for that. I have met people who have been persecuted in their countries because of certain beliefs, whether it's religious beliefs, perhaps they belong to an LGBTQ plus population, and their home country, the environment isn't, the right environment for that. So there's all kinds of things that lead people to come to the US. One of the things that everybody does appreciate about the US is our structured and standardized residency training. And I think that's a big appeal for a lot of people, even from all around the world. So I think taking, again, inventory of what made you come here and being able to talk about how the residency training here is going to help you build a foundation to practice medicine the way in which you want to and reach your goals, I think that can be the basis for a strong answer. Next question, how to frame the question, tell me about yourself effectively. So this is often the first question that is asked in a residency interview. It's a very important question. It is what we call a positioning statement. So what you say here will often dictate what the next question is. So you have to create it very carefully because you can't be sure how much the interviewer knows about you. We have a tendency to believe that every interviewer is going to read our application in great detail. And there are some that will do that, but some don't. Some just turn the pages and just kind of look quickly at our application. And believe it or not, there are some that will just look at your application for the first time when they're interviewing you. So since that's the case, you have to make sure that you meet the needs of all three of these interviewer types. And you embed your tell me about yourself answer with the most important things that are going to appeal to that particular program. To some extent, your answer is going to be chronological because people can understand a person's story often better when there's some chronology given. But you also want to insert things that you think are important to you in the program. So if, for example, this is a program that's well regarded for developing clinician educators, and they have workshops for teaching and a unique curriculum to really build your teaching skills, it may be worthwhile for you to think about how to insert some of your teaching background, because you may have gotten an interview there because you have a passion for teaching, you've been involved in it. Well, that may be something you want to share because they would quickly know that that's something that's important to you, and that would make them realize that you're somebody who is a good fit for their program. So what you put in this answer can vary from program to program. I'm actually an advocate of that approach. I don't believe that it's always good to have the same answer for every program. I believe that 75% of your tell me about yourself answer can be the same. And I believe that 20 to 25% can be adjusted for the program that you're interviewing at. Now that, of course, requires you to do some additional work, but that additional work can pay off because the next question they ask can go in the direction of your strengths and the reasons why you're a good fit. And that's exactly what you'd love to talk about because the concept of fit is so important to these programs. So there's a lot of debate, a lot of differing viewpoints on how to answer this question, but it's a positioning statement at the end of the day. And the best way to look at it is don't assume that the interviewer knows everything about you. Put some stuff in there that you think is important to you and will be important to the program. And that can be a little bit different from one program to another. Now, how do we change a negative tone question into showcasing our strengths? So it's always hard to answer a negative tone question. These are questions like, what is your greatest weakness? Or what do you view as the negative features of our specialty? What is something that you might not like about our program? These are tough questions. Now, the way to answer it is to soften it. Okay, so I'll give you an example from my own days as a residency applicant. So I applied for internal medicine, and I went to residency at Northwestern University in Chicago. And I was asked a question at my Northwestern interview, and it was about, what do you see as a negative feature of our program? A very tough question, right? And one of the things that Northwestern had at the time was 50% of your time was in their private hospital, 50% of their time was in the VA hospital. When you were in the VA hospital, all of your ward patients, so when you were on inpatient service, all of those patients would be under one attending. So that would be your teaching attending. But when you were in the private hospital and you were on the inpatient service, all of the patients had different attendings of record. So you had to interact with a lot of different attendings when you were on the inpatient service at the private hospital. So one of the criticisms of the Northwestern Internal Medicine residency program was that so much of your time is at the private hospital that you have to deal with all these different attendings, and that can become tiresome and difficult and logistically challenging. Okay, so the way I answered this question, I said that, there are so many things that excite me about the Northwestern Internal Medicine residency program. There is one thing that has come up in some of the discussion forums that I've read and out on the interview trail when I've met other applicants, a concern that some applicants have shared with me about Northwestern, and it has to do with the time that is spent at the private hospital. And while people have enjoyed their time at the private hospital, one of the things that has been challenging for them is when they've had to deal with many different attendings for the patients on their service and getting in contact with these attendings and, coming to agreement on the different plans, the plan of care. That's been something that I've heard. Now, when I came across this, I thought to myself, there's a lot of value that comes from working with a lot of different attendings. Because although we study the same subject matter, if you're working with experienced attendings that do things differently, you get so many rich perspectives. And I think that really enriches your training and makes you see things in different ways. And when I look at the Northwestern training program, I see the best of both worlds. We get these great experiences in the private hospital. And when you're at the VA hospital, you have the traditional model where you have all your patients under one attending. So to me, even though it's a concern that many people have expressed, I look at it more as something that I'll benefit from. So now if you analyze this answer, I gave them something real. I didn't present something that wasn't real. It was a real thing. I softened it by saying, this is what I've heard. And when I've heard this, I've thought about it. And I put my own spin to it, right? That this wasn't, for me, as much of a negative as it was for other people. So that's one way that you can answer a negative question, is you can talk about what may be out there, but how you view it as something different. Next question. Are there any questions that we should not ask during the interview? The answer is yes, there are some questions that we should not ask. We would rather not ask about pay and days off, especially with the faculty. Okay. A lot of times this information is on the website or is given during the interview day. A lot of times you can find these questions, the answers to these questions, after your interview day. Usually programs will make residents available to you after your interview day. So there may be a time to ask these questions that's more appropriate. And it may not always be the faculty that's the most appropriate person. The other things that you don't want to do is ask questions that have already been answered very prominently and easily on their website or in the orientation that the program director gave, or confuse one program with another. Years ago, when I was interviewing an applicant for Baylor internal medicine, somebody asked me, when do we rotate at MD Anderson? Back then, Baylor and MD Anderson did not have a relationship, so our residents did not rotate at MD Anderson. But another program in Houston, which is the University of Texas Houston program, they had a relationship with MD Anderson. So it's possible that this applicant had confused us. Now, today we have a relationship with MD Anderson, and our Baylor internal medicine residents spend quite a bit of time over there. But it can be very easy to confuse one program with another. So you have to research the programs in depth and make sure that what you researched pertains to that particular program. Okay? Now, what else don't you want to ask about? Be very careful about asking about interviewers' backgrounds. So you will get the interview schedule in advance, and you will see the names usually of the interviewers who will be interviewing you. So you can research who they are. You should look into their background, find out who they are. It'll give you comfort and confidence to know who you're dealing with, right? So that's fine. That's great. But some applicants take it too far and start showing off what they've researched about the interviewer, which makes the interviewer uncomfortable. And they'll ask questions about some esoteric thing in their research. And it becomes very clear that this interviewee is just trying to, they're just overdoing it, and it's not going to go over well. Better questions to ask in an interview are about the program. That's what the interviewer is expecting. Okay. Now you could ask a general question, to the interviewer, but don't look like you've done, this investigative analysis of the interviewer, which, will backfire. Okay. Now it's also important not to ask why questions, like why don't you have this? Because it makes them feel like what they don't have is important to you. Makes them feel like they're deficient in some way. It's also important not to ask, do you have? So you don't want to be like, do you have a curriculum on HIV? Because if they don't, and they say no, now you have an awkward situation, okay? Because they don't have something, and they feel maybe that you're judging them. Okay, so a better question would be, if you really want, to know about HIV care in the program, a better question would be, Dr. Smith, I know that I'll be encountering some patients with HIV and AIDS during my residency, and I was wondering, what are some things that I can do as a trainee in your program using the resources that you have to meet the needs of these HIV/AIDS patients? So now that's an open-ended question. Okay, so they're going to tell you, oh, we have some lectures on HIV. We have support services when you do infectious disease. So they'll go into this. But if you come right out and say, do you have a curriculum, very specific question, do you have a curriculum on HIV? Maybe they don't have a curriculum on HIV, but they have some things that can help you take care of HIV patients. So open-ended question is better than do you have? Okay. Now, the next question is a very specific question. I chose to apply mostly for preliminary tracks to improve my chances of matching, demonstrate my abilities during PGY1, and then either apply for categorical PGY1 or PGY2 if possible. Could the interviewers ask why I chose prelim track versus categorical, and what would be the best answer that does not present me as not confident in my application? So this, as I said earlier, is a very specific question that pertains to one individual. So I would encourage whoever asked this question to reach out to me directly. I think it will be very easier to address your question in that way. Now, letters of interest. We talked about this. It's not too late to send letters of interest. So please think about doing that. I think there is much to gain from letters of interest. Now, how can I make my letters of interest more effective? So we have some resources for this. I know Alyssa can share that with you. A major reason why people don't get results from letters of interest is they're not thoughtfully prepared. So they need to be crafted properly. They need to be very specific to you and to the program to show fit. So that is something we'll show you through some of the resources that we'll share. What should you do if you don't have an interview as of now? First of all, do not lose hope. Second, take care of yourself, because it can be difficult to be at this point in time and not having an interview. Not having an interview right now doesn't mean you're not going to get an interview for the whole season. But this is the time to take some actions. In addition to self-care and making sure that you're okay, letters of interest, updates, advocates. So anybody that you have out there that is attached to a program, a current resident, a fellow, an alumni of your medical school, this is the time to reach out to these people and see if they can reach out. When you reach out to them in November and say, hey, Dr. Smith, I wanted to give you an update on my situation. We're 6 weeks into the application season, and I haven't yet gotten an interview. I'm feeling a bit stressed about it and thinking about what else I can do now to enhance my chances of getting interviews. And I wanted to just chat with you, to hear your perspectives and see if, you had any thoughts on what I should do to get some interviews. And you start it like that with your advocates, and you see what they have to say. Your alumni that you haven't talked to in a while may say, oh, you know what, we can do X, Y, and Z. Your preceptor that you worked with might say, hey, you know what, I've got a friend who's attached to the residency program. Let me introduce you to them. Okay. Another preceptor might say, you know what, let me send an email to our residency program. Let them know, that you've applied and that you're interested. So reach out to your advocates when they know that things aren't going well right now. That's going to be sort of the stimulus that they may need to take some action. What else should you do if you don't have invites? I want you to reach out to me so we can talk about your particular situation. We can trace what may be going on. We can take stock of where you are as a candidate, what your strategies have been to this point, and what strategies we need to put into effect. All is not lost right now. November is a big month for interview invitations. December, people get interviews. January, and as I said, February as well. What can we do in an interview to boost our success in the match? So we talked a lot about that, okay? So a lot of our resources give high-level advice on how to elevate your performance over the standard advice that's out there. So that includes 150 plus pages of interview prep in the Successful Match book. It includes our many, many, many blog post articles on both of our websites, MD2B Connect and thesuccessfulmatch.com. So go to both sites, look at the blog, go through all the residency interview articles. On our podcast, Success in Medicine, there are episodes that I devoted to the residency interview. Sometimes I show you how to answer certain questions. So access that. On our website, thesuccessfulmatch.com, we have an excellent residency interview course. We'll give you very in-depth information, show you before and after answers, videos of what people think are good answers, strategies to elevate the answer, and then you see how the answer is transformed into something entirely different and even more powerful. So we have that. If you're really struggling, even with all these resources, we can also do a mock interview. I have a service. It's called the Residency Mock Interview Service for those of you who need extra attention. Factors IMG should work on to increase match probability. That really depends on where you are in this process. So if you are interviewing right now, it's all about interviewing well, right? Being the best interviewee you can be, which you all can do that. I know that you can do that with the work that you put into that. That is the number one thing you can do. If you're not interviewing right now, it's all about what you've done and what you haven't done. If you haven't taken the exams, obviously those are important. If you're just starting off on your USCE journey, strengthening that component of your application, earning the strongest letters of recommendation that you can, becoming a well-rounded applicant. Right? There's a lot of things for people who are not yet ready to apply. But if you're interviewing, it's about the interview. That's the biggest thing that you have to put your focus on. A few more questions. How can I look to applying to university-based clinical rotations even though my university isn't part of VSLO? You may be able to access some lists out there which compile, institutions which would allow people to apply outside of VSLO. Nothing, of course, substitutes for going to the university's website and investigating whether you can do something outside of VSLO. There's a lot of institutions out there, but keep in mind that things do change from year to year. Institutions that have been historically VSLO connected might take people outside of VSLO. Sometimes they operate in a hybrid pattern where they take people from VSLO, but they also have a means to take people outside of it. So you just have to go to their website and see what the process is. Is step one a prerequisite to create an ERS or buy an ERS token? No, the exams that you need to become ECFMG certified, you do not have to take those exams in order to buy an ERS token. And I believe that is the last question that we had. And so what I wanted to say to you, Alyssa, can you still hear me?
Yep, I can still hear you.
Is that the residency interview is difficult. There's a lot to put into to be a great interviewee, but I want to remind you of how far you have all come and how much you've done to get to this point. It's been a long journey, and I've really admired everything you've done to get to this point. You've done many, many hard things in the past. And while this is one more hard thing to do, all of you are capable of rising to the occasion and giving a great interview performance. I firmly and sincerely believe in that. And we are here to help you achieve that. And please do take a look at all these resources because they will help you show your best self in these interviews. And that's what it's all about. Alyssa?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think we can go ahead and wrap up for the night. So I will go ahead and give you guys some closing points. I just want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We truly hope that this webinar is beneficial to you and that you find these resources beneficial for your overall match process. We said it many times tonight, but I just want to reiterate that if you guys have any questions about anything related to the match, related to anything that you feel like you need guidance on or that you want to talk about, even if you just want to chat with somebody and get some ideas, we're always open to talking with you and helping you. We really want to be here for you for this process. We understand how stressful and anxiety and how much anxiety it can bring. So please take care of yourself, and we are here for you to support you in whatever way we can. So do not hesitate to reach out to anyone on our team, especially Dr. Desai. Every one of us here is rooting for your success. So thank you so much for joining with us. I did have one final thing for those of you who are still here. We are actually giving away a residency mock interview session on our Instagram page. So I will be sharing that in the chat if you are interested in participating in that. And I think with that said, I will pass it over to Dr. Desai for closing remarks.
Yes, thank you, Alyssa. I think everything that you said, I 100% agree and wholeheartedly with. We are here for you, so if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out. Again, most of you have my direct line. For those of you who are new to our program, you'll be getting that soon, so we'll be talking very soon. So anytime you need anything, just reach out. Happy to talk. And thanks for joining us today. And hang in there. We're rooting for your success.